Hey everyone, welcome back to the Commitment to Growth podcast. This is your host Mariana speaking, and thank you so much for tuning in to another episode of the show. Welcome back to the show, everyone. If you're new, welcome, and if you're not new, welcome back. In any case, wherever you're from, whatever time this finds you, I hope you're well, I hope you're happy, and I just want to say thank you so much for joining us today and for choosing this platform, this space, as your daily source of self-growth, self-improvement, and for just letting me inject you with a little bit of inspiration and encouragement on this journey that you are embarking on towards becoming your ideal, better future self. And I am just so honored that you are letting me infuse you with a little bit of my passion for self-discovery. So just want to throw in a little bit of gratitude in there. And with all that said as well, how are you? How are you doing? How is your day going so far? What has been the highlight so far? Again, just starting that off with a little bit of reflection to get us centered here before we enter this conversation, because it was filled with a lot of moments where I really had to reflect on myself. And that being said, when I reflect on myself, I find that it is super duper important to center myself first before I go and do any kind of inner work. And that always involves checking in with myself, seeing how I'm doing, how's my breath, where's my attention, where am I feeling tension in my body, for example, and what could that be bringing up for me? So this is a conversation that is going to require a little bit of discomfort in the best way, and we're going to do some reflection. We're going to do it together. And I could not think of a better person to guide us through that reflection, because this guest is somebody who has been through it all, has been through an incredible journey, and now she is using her experiences of deep transformation to help individuals who are going through their own process of unbecoming. And we talk a lot about it in the episode, so if you don't know what I mean by unbecoming, don't worry, we're going to dive right into that. So today I am super excited to bring you Miss Kelly Anderson, who is a certified life coach, spiritual enthusiast, and former 9-to-5 corporate ladder climber. After navigating several massive life changes during the pandemic, Kelly experienced a soul awakening that sent her on the path of fully stepping into her purpose. Through her coaching business, she helps change makers and soul-driven individuals shift from feeling stuck to thriving in their own unique version of purpose and fulfillment. How in line does that sound with me and what I like to bring you? So if that piques your interest, then you are going to really enjoy what I have in store for you today. This was such an incredible conversation that I could just relate to so much, because personally, I feel like the entirety of 2022 has been my own spiritual awakening, and needless to say, it has been anything but, oh my gosh, what are the words here? Suspenseful, pivoting, riveting, painful for sure. There's been a lot of pain that I've had to endure, pain that I've had to face, but there has been incredible growth. There has been incredible moments of happiness after seeing that growth, and it has truly made me realize, which is also something that Kelly and I really talk about in this episode, which is the idea that after every moment of seemingly never-ending darkness and disappointment and frustration, there is always something bigger and brighter waiting for you on the other side. You just have to use your hope and your belief that that thing is there to propel you during those dark moments. So this is a conversation that really ignited me and really reminded me of the importance of holding on to that higher purpose and that higher knowledge of the bigger and better that is out there for each and every single one of us. And I am so excited to share this conversation with you because of that, because I know that this will also give you that reminder, especially if you are needing it right now, because you are in your own, be it deep period of inner work or transformation, or you are going through big life changes that were foreseen or unexpected and maybe are causing you pain or sadness or frustration, if that is you right now, this conversation is for you. So I am super excited. Buckle up, grab a pen, pencil, your favorite notebook, you're on a scrap piece of paper, because Kelly really takes us on a journey through what spiritual awakenings are, how to navigate them, and what they really are meant to serve for us in our lifetime. So, I hope you're excited as I am. And without further ado, here is Kelly Anderson, everybody. Before we do that, I do want to acknowledge that this episode was recorded on the land of the Lekwungen-speaking peoples, as well as the Songhees and Esquimalt nations, whose land, ancestral land, I can say that I'm a very grateful, privileged, uninvited settler to, and I acknowledge with all of this privilege that I hold that the knowledge and the relations that I'm building to the land continue, and that I am so grateful to be fortifying and building those relationships through the lens and the words of the Indigenous communities in my own community. And I look forward to continuing my commitment to growth in those areas of allyship, in those areas of learning what it really means to reconcile with what was done and how to give back to those communities that suffered at the hands of capitalism and colonialism. And I look forward to continuing to bringing this conversation to the table as well. So, without further ado, here is the episode, everybody. Kelly, happy Thursday. Thank you so much for being a guest on the Commit to Growth podcast. How are you?
I'm doing so well. Thank you so much for having me, Mariana. Like, I've been looking forward to this all week.
Me too. For people who are tuning in, I was just telling Kelly that I've also been counting down the days, just because when we first connected, Kelly sent me what she does with her work and what she's dedicated to doing for people. And I just feel like this happened at the perfect time, not just for myself, because what you talk about is something that I feel like I've related to, especially this year, but just because I think everybody needs to hear this at some point. So I'm ecstatic to hear what you have to say.
I'm excited to share.
Right, beautiful. Well, let's dive right in. The way we kind of get rolling here on the Commitment to Growth podcast is I ask you what your story is. If you can tell us Kelly's story to how you got to where you are today.
Yeah, absolutely. Where do I want to start?
I know it's pretty broad. It's
broad, but I'll give a little bit of context from my past, because I think it's important to kind of like show where I was and kind of how long I stayed in that position until the awakening happened. And I know we'll kind of get into the awakening as we go in the conversation, but essentially when I graduated college, which was back in 2006, so it's been some time, I fell into a career, which is recruiting. Recruiting is typically not a career that you go to school for. It's something that you kind of fall into when you're looking for a job out of school. You can be very successful at it. There's a lot of career growth opportunities. And so that was kind of my path. And, wasn't sure if that was something I was going to do long-term. But for the time it felt good. And I kind of always just assumed like, well, I'll figure it out later. I'll figure out what I want to be when I grow up. And so as time progressed throughout my 20s, I had made some job changes. I had, moved up the ranks, so to speak, within the recruiting career. I had met my then husband. We had worked together at one of my recruiting positions. And so life was really on this path of like, gosh, like I'm really building a well-rounded life. Like a lot of people would probably look at my life and say, you have it all. Like you must be really happy. You've got a great career. You've got a great partner who then became my husband. Great place to live, great social circle. All of it was like going wonderfully. And so over time, it felt like, all right, like I've made it. And it stayed that way for probably, 13, 15 years. And I remember the moment that I noticed things starting to shift a little bit. And that was in late 2018. And I remember this moment so distinctly. I was visiting my sister, who at the time was living in Seattle. And, she kind of had just been asking me how life was going. And seemingly out of nowhere, I just completely broke down. And I was like, I'm looking for purpose and I don't know what my purpose is. And it's just this whisper that's been coming up to the surface where I didn't quite know how to answer that question. And I also didn't know where to even start to even begin to uncover how to answer that question. And so that was the turning point for me where I realized something was off. And I thought it was just career focused at the time. Job had been very stressful. I was coming home, either working out or drinking alcohol or seeing friends, going to bed, waking up and doing it all over again. And it was just this like cyclical routine that I was stuck in. And it just didn't feel good. And so it was really interesting to start noticing that in that conversation with my sister of just like, gosh, like something's missing. And so the months that followed that became very pivotal for me. And I didn't know it at the time, but I know now I was entering into my dark night of the soul. And if your listeners have, interest in spirituality, they've either been through one or they're familiar with one, but it was very much this time of like shedding a lot of things that couldn't be with me as I continued my growth in this lifetime. And so that looked like getting a new job, hoping that would fix things, hoping that would help me feel more purposeful. That looked like deciding to separate with my then husband, which ultimately led to our divorce. That looked like going into a pandemic where we're all isolated at home and lacking community and lacking connection. And so I really look at 2019, 2020 as this all-encompassing dark night of the soul, which really is ultimately what led to my awakening of my purpose, which is now coaching. So in a nutshell, that's the story. I'm sure we'll get into some of the details, but that was really the trigger point, was me realizing that I was not living in my purpose and that I needed to do something about it.
Wow. Oh my gosh. There's so much I want to take apart from that. First of all, thank you for sharing that, because it's something that I'm sure still rings really deeply to you, because I can't imagine what those 2 years must have been, just trying to basically start yourself from the ground up, like realizing that you may have been disconnected from yourself for a long time, and then trying to build those grassroots to say, how the heck do I get back to myself? So I think the first thing I'd like to ask you is, when your sister asked you that question, is that kind of emotional moment that you experienced, is that something that you had seen coming, or what do you think that particular question struck in you that induced that?
It's not that I didn't see it coming. I didn't expect it to be as profound as it was. They say that things that you don't deal with emotionally live in your body. And it was almost like my body was like purging at that moment of just like really deep emotion that felt very uncontrollable at the time. And so it's almost like it needed to happen because I'd been stuffing it down for so long. This notion of like, I'm not happy in my career. I don't know what my purpose is. Am I happy in my life? Like, it's almost like I'd let those questions fester for so long that it was stored away somewhere in the body. And so when she kind of probed me on that, it all just kind of like came out. And it was just the very, very beginning, scratching the surface of the emotions that were to come over the next couple of years.
Yeah, 100%. I think if anything I've learned this year is that your intuition has no problem screaming at you if it has to, and it will do so in the most unholy of ways sometimes. And I can only imagine that it's probably something that you can relate to, right? Like in that moment, once you allow itself to manifest, there's no pushing it back down, right?
Right. Once you bring the thought to the surface and once you bring the realization to the surface, you have two options. You can take action and begin to do something about it and answer that call, or you can ignore it and it will continue to come back to you. And eventually it's going to push you off the cliff to go deal with it. And that's what happened with my marriage, quite frankly, is if I really am honest and I look back, and even with my career too, not just the marriage, but if I look back, the signs were there and I ignored them for so long
Mm.
And ultimately, like when he and I decided to go our separate ways, like it was something that probably could have been done months before. And I was
Mm.
ignoring it. I was ignoring it, hoping it would work itself out. And it's true what they say, like the universe will take care of it for you if you don't take action yourself.
Exactly, exactly. And it's not always enjoyable the way it does that. Right? So
No.
no, it's not. Um, I think what a lot of people struggle with, myself included, is when that intuitive feeling arises and it's so strong and you can't ignore it anymore. Sometimes it brings to the surface a lot of things, like in your experience, that have to be amended in some way. And where I think a lot of us fall off track or get discouraged is that we look at how much there is to solve and are like, oh my gosh, this is way too much. So, how did you go about amending each little thing? Or I guess what was your approach to that? Because it can feel super overwhelming when there's so much, right?
Yes, very
Mm-hmm.
overwhelming. And I want to just like quickly note something before I answer that, is that I am someone that grew up with a massive disconnection from my intuition.
Mm.
I'm the youngest in my family, and so I was always observant of what others were doing, my older siblings. I very much wanted to do what my parents thought I should do. And
Mm.
so a lot of my big decisions in life, even into early adulthood, were based on that rather than my own intuition and gut feel about what is best
Mm.
for me. And so that was really a muscle that I had to train. And this
Mm.
awakening process, this moment between 2018 and 2020, was the massive like expose of you're disconnected from your intuition and it's time to reconnect. So I just want to make that clear,
Mm.
as I had no idea how to tap into my intuition until that time period.
Mm. Mm-hmm.
And now that I can look back and say, yes, that was my intuition talking to me. It was a very faint whisper that became louder and louder. Like now I know what my intuition feels like. And
Mm.
and to be clear, like when your intuition is nudging you to do something that seems scary, to do something that seems overwhelming, that's not a problem. We like to
Mm.
make it a problem because we want to protect ourselves from failure, from being hurt, from anything that feels, unsafe. Um, and so it's important to really recognize that if you're going to grow through something that your intuition's nudging you towards, like it is going to feel uncomfortable, but
Mm-hmm.
you also have the tools to do it. And you have to trust yourself to do it, and you have to trust your intuition is guiding you in the right direction. And so that's where a lot of the work is, I think, for people, is how do I trust my intuition, and how do I know that it's my intuition voice versus my loud ego. And
Mm.
that's a daily practice where you have to understand, like, how does it feel in your body when your ego is talking to you? And does it feel panicky? Does it feel like you're something sinking in your gut? Does it feel very fearful? Like what kind of feelings is it stoking? Versus when your intuition's talking to you, does it feel soothing? Does it feel calming? There may still be some fear there, but
Mm-hmm.
you're going to start noticing a distinction as you start building that deeper connection with yourself.
Mm.
So yeah, it's not that it's going to take away the discomfort of taking action. It's that you get to trust yourself through taking that action, that your
Mm.
intuition inspired you to do.
Mm-hmm. That's so huge. And thank you so much for bringing up that point, because I think that that's so relatable. Like when you have that gut instinct that is telling you it doesn't matter, like nothing else matters, you just have to do this thing that you know deep down is true to you, but is going to take a lot of breaking down the things that you know, the relationships that you know, like in your case, a breakup or leaving a job. Um, it feels so scary, and we try to avoid it so much for the sake of avoiding the period of discomfort that it's going to take. But I think what I always have to remind myself is that in the moments where, like, after you've made the decision and you're like, what the heck did I do? You have to remember how you felt the moment that you made the decision. And that's has to be your grounding force that reminds you, no matter what's going on right now, no matter how difficult this feels, I acted from soul and from my heart, and that is all I can count on to get me through this. So,
Yes, absolutely. And to your point, like we as humans are conditioned very early on to want to avoid discomfort, right? Like
mhm,
think of like a yoga pose, you know, you're in crow or something like that. Like you so
mhm,
badly want to get out of that pose because it's hard, it's uncomfortable, it's sticky, it's challenging.
mhm,
When really like it's actually forcing us to be present in that discomfort and to learn
mm,
something about ourselves in that discomfort. And you know what I tell my clients sometimes, or at least challenge them to do, is anytime they are in an uncomfortable season of life, is for them to reflect back like years before, like how many other uncomfortable seasons of life have they made it through? And what was the silver lining of that? What did they learn on the other side? Who did they become on the other side? It gives them an opportunity to build evidence that you've made it through hard things before, you've made it through discomfort before, your intuition guided you through that. It can do it again and again and again. Like life is going to continuously have these uncomfortable moments that our intuition guides us through.
mhm, mhm. Oh, that's so beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. Um, I really want to get into kind of post Dark Night of the Soul and into what you're doing now and how you chose this path for yourself. So, I think the first thing I should ask you though is to define what Dark Night of the Soul is for anybody that's listening that doesn't know what that means necessarily.
Yeah. Ooh, for me, the dark night of the
Mhm,
soul meant shedding everything that I was no longer meant to be. So that meant shedding old ways of being, old lifestyles, old habits, old routines, old people, um, and really making way for new to come in. And
mhm,
so that looked like shedding my job, shedding my marriage, shedding old friendships. Um, it's this feeling of like I'm losing everything and I don't know who I am anymore. So for anyone listening, if that's you, very good chance you may be in a dark night of the soul. And also know, I want to say, like, this is happening for you, not to you.
mhm,
Um,
mhm,
because when you're shedding old energies, you're allowing yourself to make space for who you're stepping into, this new version of yourself. And
mhm,
that's why I personally had to go through mine, was to create space for me to step into my purpose, me to step into my, you know, sacred relationship that I'm in now, and many other things to come. And so I spent most of 2020 working on building my relationship with the divine, with the universe, with a couple of spiritual mentors that kind of helped give me the tools that I needed to do so. And come 2021 is when I decided like it was time to step into the purpose. And
mhm,
so I remember the very first Monday of January, which coming
mhm.
off of holiday break, it's never fun logging into your laptop
No.
after like 2 weeks of festivities and fun.
Mhm,
And I opened my laptop that Monday morning and I said, this is the year that I leap. And so I hired a coach and really went into it with the intention of I want to explore coaching.
mhm,
I've always been a
mhm,
connector. My career has always called on me to be a networker, a communicator, someone that cares a lot about people. But I wanted to apply that in a way that felt more impactful and more valuable and
mhm,
more rooted in my values. And so I went through the coaching process with my coach at that time for a few months, and I started planning my exit strategy from corporate America.
mhm,
And by May of last year, I resigned from my position and went
mhm,
through a life coaching certificate program for 6 months. And by the end of last year, started my coaching business. So it's
mhm,
wild to look back and see how much has changed in a year and a half, but it really was the result of the dark night of the soul and the healing work that you know really pushed me into to get to the point where I had the courage to make that decision.
mhm, mhm. So a lot of self-discovery kind of like ladled into that. I think that's so important to know and for people to know is that I think that sometimes we perceive that the answers will just come to us if we just wait. But I like that you did something very actionable. You hired a coach, you made a plan for how you were going to leave your career, you explored your options. And I think that that's where I spoke about this on a recent episode, the idea that we are responsible for creating our own opportunities. And I think that a lot of us are really comfortable telling ourselves, like, oh, well, I'm stagnant because the universe is telling me to rest, or it's telling me that it's not my time. And sometimes that is, I think that's an intuitive feeling that you can gather. But I think sometimes it's actually telling us, like, no, you actually have to go create something for yourself. So I like that you made it something actionable, because I think that often we kind of just expect it to come to us, but I think that can do more harm than good in the long run. So,
Yeah, right. It's interesting because there is this fine balance of like putting your full faith and trust in the universe, which I think is beautiful and necessary for anyone who's on a similar spiritual path like this. But it also requires inspired action or aligned action, whatever you want to call it. You know, the universe isn't just going to hand everything over to you without you lifting a finger. It's going to plant the seed. It's going to plant the idea, the passion, whatever that is. But like, you are still a sovereign being and have to make the decision to take the action steps yourself. And then you're kind of working in this like co-creation with the universe.
And when you kind of put your finger, like when the seed was planted for you, that maybe coaching was your thing, was there a moment that you realized that, or was that just you going through that reflection during your dark night of the soul?
Yeah, it was towards the end of the dark night where I was starting to step into this new version of myself. So I had kind of been through most of the healing for the time being through the really like deep, lonely parts. And I was feeling lighter, feeling ready to take action. And I had connected with a number of women through a spiritual mentorship group that I had been a part of that were coaches in some way, shape, or form. And I, reached out to them and just picked their brain, like, hey, like, tell me about this coaching thing. And the more that I kept hearing different perspectives on it, the more I tied it back to kind of my natural talents in my previous career. It was like, gosh, like this just feels so aligned for me. And so in some ways, perhaps those were signs and messages from the universe that was the path to take. And then it was really up to me to put the action in place to explore it. And as I got further into it, my coaching school and building, networking relationships, the more I got into it was like, okay, this feels really good. This feels exactly where I'm supposed to be. This is how I can give back to the world in a way that feels really natural and aligned with who I am.
Gotcha. Again, the idea of inspired action, right? And I think that's a really great point that you made there, how you kind of looked at what you were already doing and saw how your purpose was already kind of ladled into that. I think that happens more often than we think. Like, I think that we're never too far from our purpose or the things that we're being called to do. I think that even if it's like a brief transient moment in our day where we're bored, or we have nothing to do and we're like, oh, what should I do right now? I think sometimes it comes through as like, this is what my heart's being called to do. So I like that you kind of looked at your life and said, okay, what am I already doing that I'm good at, that comes naturally to me, but I also love, and then flip that into what you're doing now.
Yes, you make such a good point, Mariana, because this is something that I love to invite my clients to think about differently. Is so often, like, we've always been told you have to go out and find your purpose, right? Like it's this, it's like this choose your own adventure hunt and, suit up and go find it.
Yeah.
And what you said there, like, sparked me, because my thought and my perspective on purpose is it's already within us. It's already coded into our DNA when we're born. And it's our job to uncover that and unlock that as we go through this human experience. And typically it can become clouded for a lot of people because of all this outside, like, social conditioning and what have you, that dims that light that's within us. And so it's our responsibility to really, like, rediscover that light, what is it that you're passionate about? What is it that sparks your soul? What's something that you can get lost in and lose complete track of time?
Mm-hmm.
Those are kind of the surface questions that I start really inviting clients to ask themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And oftentimes they find it's like, gosh, it is something that's already within me. It's not something I have to go out and grasp.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I like to see it as more of, I think, that kind of like the human condition or the human experience. I like to phrase it now as we're actually unbecoming rather than necessarily becoming. Yeah.
I love that.
I'm
I
crossing
love
my
that
heart
so
too.
much.
It's such a like our job is actually to unearth ourselves, not go out and find ourselves necessarily, you know? So I love that you relate to that. And that's kind of what you encourage in your practice. And I think that that's a great segue into what I want to ask you next, which is tell us about your practice. Like, how do you coach people through getting in tune with their intuition and their higher purpose in that sense?
Yeah, I love that
Mm-hmm.
question. Oh, so I find that
Mm-hmm.
the clients that I work with tend to have similar backgrounds to things that I've experienced before.
Mm-hmm.
So I can really place like a deep personal connection because I've been through where they're at. And so I find that clients are often in a place of feeling stuck. Um, they feel like
Mm-hmm.
maybe they're stuck in a career, stuck in a lifestyle, stuck in a way of being. And they have this intuitive hit that they're meant for more, but they don't know what to do with it. It feels scary. It feels like, gosh, like I couldn't possibly create this life for myself.
Mm-hmm.
And so my job as their coach is to work with them to reframe that and allow them to see what is possible for them and that it is possible to create it simply by, well, I say simply, but it's work. But
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
by shifting our thoughts, shifting our mindset, getting clear on what our values are, really diving into what our purpose is. And then I'd
Mm-hmm.
say the meat of the work that we do is really getting clear on like what are those belief patterns that have held you back. We all have them. Some are conscious, some are subconscious, but until we can really get clear on what are our beliefs that are keeping us in this place of stuckness, then we can't create the new belief to help us move through it. And
Mm-hmm.
so that's a
Mm-hmm.
lot of the work that I find that I do with my clients is, they see themselves here right now. They want to see themselves here, but what's all the stuff that's in between? What's all the beliefs
Mm-hmm.
and the, old programming or old conditioning that's not allowing them to get to this place? And so that's what we really
Mm-hmm.
dismantle and then rebuild.
Mm-hmm. I want to ask you about the subconscious beliefs that you mentioned because I think that often we are more conscious about, well, I guess maybe conscious isn't the word, but more aware of the conscious thoughts that, like, when we're about to either public speak or something and we start saying to ourselves, well, I can't do it. But underneath even that chatter, there's more that lies under the surface that we don't necessarily see. And I think that that is the more harmful stuff because that's the subconscious limitation that prevents us from like being at a higher vibration to manifest more things into our lives. So how do you help people identify and pinpoint what those are that we're not
Yeah.
necessarily conscious of?
Yeah. It's usually with one simple question, and it's why. So if I'm in a
Mm,
conversation with a client and they tell me, I can't do XYZ because of this, I'll say, okay, interesting. Why? And then they'll give me another answer and I'll say, why? And we whittle that
mm,
why down to a place where you have a reaction. And
mm,
my intent is not to make them feel so uncomfortable that they have to like sit and experience all these emotions. However, I find that when we whittle our answers down to that place of feeling into the discomfort in our body, like that's where the real subconscious belief surfaces. And you're like, oh my gosh, like I didn't even know I was holding on to that belief. It was disguised as
mm,
this, but it was actually because of this thing that happened when I was 10 years old, or this thing that I heard my parents say when I was a teenager. Like they don't even realize that it's there. And so we have to like really break through all of the disguises that we put on that belief by continuously
mm,
asking why. It sounds so simple, but like you'd be surprised
mhm,
where your mind takes you when you continue
Mm,
to ask yourself that question.
totally. And it's a powerful experience because I think it gives you that window into what your body is holding on to, right? Because we embody so many of the emotions and beliefs that we suppress and tell ourselves about ourselves. So it's a powerful experience, but at the same time, I think it can be so daunting. So, how do you, like, once you have the why, or once you perceive that you have kind of like the root cause, you've done the root cause analysis, um, what do you do with that? Like, where do you start? What would you tell people where that they can
Yeah.
start? Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So there's just definitely a moment of like compassion, right? Like, because when you
Mm-hmm.
uncover a really deep seated subconscious belief, that can create a lot of like internal chaos in your mind and in
Mm-hmm.
your body that you weren't expecting. And so I want to make sure clients feel like they have space to honor that,
Mm-hmm.
instead of jumping right into action. Okay, what do we do about it? Because maybe the answer isn't to do something about it right in that moment. Maybe it's to actually sit and hold space for the fact that you held this belief, like have compassion for the fact that you have this belief. Maybe get curious about that belief. Where did that come from, do you think? Who gave you that belief? And start like creating closure around that belief, knowing that you don't want to believe that anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And once you kind of get to that place where you feel like, okay, I feel complete that this wasn't mine, I inherited this belief from somewhere or someone, then you can start creating like, here's what I actually believe, and here's what I choose to believe. And then start putting the daily practice into how you're going to embody that new belief. So it's very much a process. It's not quick to change your belief system
Mm-mm.
whatsoever.
No.
There's just this level of like compassion and honoring that has to be done. Otherwise, you're kind of masking it and bypassing it a
Mm-hmm.
little bit.
Yeah, totally. I love that you bring that up because I think that we tend to create a distinction between holding space for feelings and then the taking action part. Like we see them as maybe like mutually exclusive in some way, but I think that they're one big part because in taking action, you have to sit there and acknowledge the feelings and understand what they are, what they're saying. Um, and yet we judge ourselves so much for sitting in the pain. We perceive ourselves to be pitying ourselves when in reality it's healing the inner child, forgiving yourself for what you've been holding on to. So I think that it's a really important part of healing to not see them as mutually exclusive or counterproductive, to do them separately. Like it's all one process.
Yeah. And there may be even some work done. Maybe the work isn't even to build a new belief right away. Maybe the work is to actually like give yourself permission to forgive yourself for having that belief, like, and acknowledge that it's okay that you had that belief, that you had that feeling. We so badly, like you said, like we want to judge ourselves for it, and we want
Mm-hmm.
to, like come down on ourselves harshly, and that's not serving us either to
No.
create that reaction. And so I think, building the muscle of giving yourself permission to feel and heal beyond that, like sometimes that's a process in and of itself, like I said before, creating that new belief and working on that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. um that being said, when you're training people to get more in tune with their intuition, what's the starting place for somebody who has been so far from it for so long that they can't differentiate between that or their ego? Or the common one that I hear is intuition versus anxiety. Like where's the distinction between that?
Yeah. Ooh, that's so good. A lot of the questions that I ask around intuition is it's allowing them to kind of imagine if your intuition was something you could see, feel, touch, hear. Like I allow them the space to start imagining how they would define it that way. Like, what does it look
Mm,
like? What color is it? What does it feel like in the body? What does it
mm-hmm,
sound like? Is it a voice? Is it an ambient sound?
mm-hmm,
And
mm-hmm.
then I ask them to really like point to evidence that their intuition has spoken to them before. And there's a lot of resistance when I ask those questions because some clients will say, well, I don't know. I've never tapped into my intuition before, so I don't know where it's guided me. And it's like, let's go deeper on that, because I bet you have, like
Mm-hmm.
really challenging them to like get under that layer of, thinking that they don't have access to it. And so, um, and then from there, like I will give them an opportunity to have a daily intuition practice. So maybe that looks like meditation. Maybe that looks like journaling, where you're getting all of your thoughts down on paper. I find that when you get your thoughts down on paper, not just letting them swirl in your brain, you create separation between
Mm-hmm.
you and the thought. And it allows you the opportunity to really get clear on like which thought is mine, which one is my truth, versus which one is coming from a fear-based state. So
Mm-hmm.
that's something that I feel like has been really successful for both myself and my clients.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I am also a huge advocate for journaling. I do it really often myself. And I think that when you can, I think that's a beautiful practice. And I hadn't looked at it that way. Like when you can create that distinction between yourself and the thought, and you look at the thoughts and you can say, okay, this one feels like this one feels really good, this one feels really true. That's a really great way of getting in touch with what your intuition feels like, is by, I guess, noticing what the thought induces. So I hadn't looked at it that way.
Yeah.
That's beautiful.
Yeah. And I love what you said, like noticing what the thought induces. Because we
Mm-hmm.
can take each thought and dissect it and say, is this thought true? Is this thought mine? How does this thought make me feel? And you can go through like line by line. It sounds tedious, but I promise you, like this is a
Mm-hmm.
game changer when you get in a routine of
Totally.
it, is noticing how it makes you feel. And if it gives you that anxiety, it's like chances are that's coming from a fear-based state and from your ego. If it feels like it sparks a little light in you and you're like, ooh, I like the way that sounds, I like the way that feels, like good chance that might be coming from your intuition. Only you know how
Mm,
to how to sort of distinguish that, but those are some telltale signs that I know have worked for me and have worked for clients.
totally. And I think that's the hardest part sometimes, is that you can have all of these, you can have so many people tell you, here's how to get more in tune with it, here's what it'll bring up for you, but you're the only one that can decipher what that feels like for you. And I think as much as that can be scary, it's also like the beautiful aspect of it when you kind of like, it's a very, I think, transcendental moment in your self-growth and in your self-discovery when you actually put your finger on, okay, wow, that is my intuition. Like, this is who I am. I think that's what we're all striving for at the end of the day, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And there's a lot of, as you said earlier, which I love the term unbecoming.
Mm,
There's a lot
mm-hmm,
of unbecoming and shedding that has to happen to allow space for that intuition to speak.
mm-hmm,
If we are constantly running a rat race and busying ourselves and distracting ourselves, so that we don't feel, or so that we don't experience boredom, which is a big thing
mm-hmm,
that I'm talking about right now, um,
mm-hmm,
we don't make way for that intuition to come up. And so
mm-hmm,
the other thing that I would, invite listeners to try out is put yourself in a position of boredom, like often,
mm,
weekly, and see what comes up for you. Like allow yourself to be
mm,
bored without grabbing your phone, or without feeling like you've got to go do something or do chores or whatever that is. Like allow yourself to feel the boredom and like what's coming up for you there. Um,
mm.
because that's kind of the white space that allows the intuition to also speak up during that time.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, I love that so much. That's something I'm going to start implementing into my daily life as well, I think. But because I think that beyond your intuition, it's not just, it's also the urges that push you to leave the boredom because you either can't sit with yourself for some reason, or the thoughts that are coming in that are scaring you away from yourself. That's the stuff that needs addressing, I maybe the quickest or most importantly. So that's such a, you just blew my mind. That's so powerful. I love that. I love that.
Yep. There
Mm-hmm.
are there are always messages in the boredom. Like I
Mm-hmm.
I highly encourage everyone to write that down and remember that.
Yes, please. I hope you're all sitting. If you're listening, please pause this, go write that down somewhere where you see it often. put yourself in boredom instead of, because I think we always aim to leave it, and get productive or go do something creative, but there's merit in sitting with ourselves through it and seeing what comes up for us, like you said. So I love that. We were talking about unbecoming, and I think that's also a brilliant segue into talking about spiritual awakenings. And yeah, Kelly's touching her heart, so am I have this theory right now, and I don't know if this is whack or something. I just feel like it's happened to me this year and to a lot of people in my life, but I have this belief that a lot of the world is going through a collective spiritual awakening, and I don't know if it's because we now have more access to meditation practices or to people such as yourself that are in the field teaching us about what it's like, the importance of it, the importance of getting in tune with ourselves. But I recently this year had a spontaneous embodiment session with a coach that I interviewed here on the podcast. We had a session together, and it brought up so much for me that has just pivoted me in such a different direction. So much has changed in my life over the last few months, and I just have found that other people haven't had the embodiment experience, but they're going through similar awakenings, call it. So I'm interested to hear what you define that as and how we can kind of walk through that experience, because as much as, like you said, it feels super uncomfortable and scary because you have to shed sometimes so much of who you are and what you've known, it's also where like you get closest to yourself. So all that to say, please share your wisdom with us about spiritual awakening.
Yes. Oh, this topic could go so many different directions, but I want to acknowledge something that you said, Mariana, and I fully agree with you. I think that we are in the midst of a collective awakening right now. And that looks a number of different ways for a lot of people. You could slice and dice that, spiritually, politically, like whatever it is, right? But I think that, there's a lot of negativity to find in the pandemic and how that was a, massive breakdown of the world. I choose to look at it as a blessing in disguise for a lot of people. And I say that with love because I know it has been incredibly challenging for a lot of people in a number of ways.
Of course.
Myself included too. But the blessing that I choose to see in it is that it really allowed us to disconnect from all of the identities that we cling to that are of this world, right? Physical identities such as your job title, the car that you drive, the home that you live in, the type of friend you are, the partner that you are, if you're a mother or a father. We cling to these titles and these roles, and we define that as who we are. And that's not who we are. Those are roles that we play in society. I like to say that I'm a spiritual being having a human experience, and that's sort of the way that I define myself right now. And everything else is just like something that I experience while I'm here being a human on earth. And I think that is part of the awakening, is realizing that we're not these things, these titles, these roles that we play. We're actually much deeper souls than that, and we're having an experience here. And I feel that once we get to that place where we can create separation from who we are as a soul versus the role that we play, our perspective on everything around us changes so drastically. The things that we used to get caught up in that seemed so important and so urgent and so crucial suddenly become just another thing in your day.
Totally. It's that boredom aspect.
Yeah. Right. And you realize the actual importance of being here is to learn and to grow. And it's not to become the richest person on the planet. If you want to, great, no problems. But it's not to feed yourself with all these external things that we think are going to make us happy and make us fulfilled and whatnot. Like, because ultimately we do find out in the awakening process that those are not the things that actually create happiness for us. That has to be created from within, and that's part of the awakening process is realizing that it's inner work, and it's creating inner wisdom that allows us to step into that happiness and fulfillment. And then everything else is kind of like an extra, a nice to have. It may add some flair and some fun, but it isn't what defines happiness for us. And so those are some of the things that I think I've learned through the awakening. I'm sure everyone has their own experience, but the other thing that it did for me, that I'll mention, that I'm sure like your listeners probably can relate to, is it allowed me to reconnect with my spirituality. So I've always been a pretty spiritual person. I did not grow up going to church or anything like that. So there was no religious, aspect tied to my spirituality, but I've always felt that there is something bigger out there in the world, something that, is more powerful and a higher being. Like I never really quite knew how to define it. And going through my awakening process was really, I would say, the sort of rebirth and reconnection to the divine and to spirit for me. Because once I started seeing signs, symbols, messages, things happening for me, like after a while, you're like, this just isn't a coincidence. Nothing's a coincidence. And so it really restored my faith in the divine, and how we really like co-create with the divine and the universe throughout our lifetime.
Oh my God. I I wish I could articulate how like deeply that hit me, but first of all, thank you. I think, yes, that is something so collectively felt by so many people, but I think that we struggle to put a name or a definition to it. And I fully agree. I think the pandemic was such an awakening moment for so many people, because we were forced to sit in that boredom, where I guess you could call it boredom in some ways, where the things that we used to do every single day, work, family, seeing friends, were no longer available to us. So how do you find entertainment in that? How do you find fun in that? How do you find comfort in that discomfort? And we've seen what do they call it right now? The great recession, the great
the great resignation.
The great resignation.
Yeah.
That's what it is.
Yeah.
So many people pivoting, like, just as like a funny side note, I guess it's kind of funny, not really, but in November, my roommate and I lost our house to flooding here in Victoria, and we couldn't find, my landlord couldn't find contractors, because they were saying that so many people that used to be contractors left their job because of the pandemic. They just realized they had to do other things, and now there's so many more life coaches, there's so many people in your field of work that are helping people navigate the big life experiences that very few things actually set you up for in your life, right? Like, you can only learn so much about finance and how to raise a child, but when it comes to having an experience like a spiritual awakening, you're like, wow, like nothing could have prepared me for this. So I fully agree, and that resonated with me so much. So thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, and I would even say that those who are, say they're active participants in the Great Resignation, like it may not even be an awakening of a spiritual nature that they're having, but I would say even collectively, for those who don't have a spiritual connection to anything, like there is still this sense of deep self-reflection of like, what do I truly value in life? What is this all for? What does this all mean? And so even if they're not exploring that deep down the spiritual rabbit hole, like some of us are, like there is still this sense of introspection happening where people are making those decisions to, step into more fulfilling careers, or staying at home with their kids, or going back to school, whatever that looks like for them. Like there's still really this deep sense of reflection going on. And I love that. And, the other thing I was going to say is the awakening process to me feels like this lift of consciousness. Like I think back to like 3 years ago, before all of this happened, and I think back to what did my day-to-day routine look like? And it was like, wake up at 5:30, shower, rush out the door, go to my favorite coffee shop, commute to work, run around to meetings all day, sit in traffic, come home, go to the gym, come home, eat, go to bed. And it was just like on repeat.
Mm,
And when I look back on that, I'm thinking to myself, like, how conscious was I throughout
oh yeah.
throughout that
Mm-hmm.
day? And how much of
Mm-hmm.
that was done with intention versus just,
Mm,
autopilot. And so I feel like
yeah.
a lot of people who are maybe experiencing this awakening or have been through it probably are also feeling this distinction of, hey, I used to live very unconsciously, and now I'm living very consciously and with intention and making decisions throughout my day that
Mm-hmm.
I'm more present for.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that you bring that up because I think it's kind of the predominant idea that I see in spiritual practices. It's shifting out of autopilot into consciousness, like living in the way that you most authentically want to live, even if right now that feels like, oh yeah, the 9 to 5 job and going to the gym, like you said, and just following this routine. It's like, is that really what you want? Is that really what you're being called to do? I think that is a huge aspect of the spiritual awakening, but also an idea that you mentioned earlier that I think has been my mantra for 2022, which is giving yourself what you're looking for from out there. You know, I
Yeah.
think you brought up such a beautiful point when you said that when you realize that the spiritual journey is actually you in some way coming home to yourself to be your best friend, to be your source of support, to be the person that you seek advice from or wisdom from, that's when you've like made it. And I'm not saying there's a point in which you're like, oh, I don't rely on any external validation or friends or anything, but um stepping into the comfort of that and into strengthening that muscle is, I think, what encompasses the spiritual journey the most. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And that's hard work, especially when you've spent your entire lifetime like seeking external validation and happiness
Mm-hmm.
from other people, activities, jobs, schools, whatever it is. So it's really hard to unbecome that
Totally.
and build the muscle of like, oh, it all starts from within. So that is definitely a regular practice to get to that point. And
Mm-hmm.
to your point, like it doesn't have to look perfectly. um,
No. Mm-mm.
Part of it is finding the enjoyment in that process of the unbecoming.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yes, absolutely. What is something that you would tell somebody who is trying to live more outside of external validation and is trying to get that from themselves? Like, where's a good place to start in that regard?
Mm, so good. I think the number one place that I would have people start is getting clear on their values. And I have
Mm,
a core values guide on my link tree, which I'll share with you guys.
cool. Yes.
But this helps you really uncover at my core, what do I truly value in this life? And once you
Mm,
get clear on that, to me, I think of your values as your soul's operating system.
mm,
Um, all of the decisions that you make, the actions that you take, the trajectory of your life are all rooted in what you value the most. And once you're clear on that, then you can really get I would say like very like what's the word I'm looking for? You can decipher between like what is an alignment for you and what is not. So
mm,
if an opportunity comes your way or a person comes your way, like you can really quickly identify if that is for you or not, and you don't have to go through the potential pain and suffering of figuring out that that doesn't actually make you happy, because you can just go back to your cheat sheet, which is your values, and be able to identify like, does this align or does this not? And so it's not that the goal is to avoid pain and suffering, because that
mm-hmm,
will always be there, but the goal is to live in alignment and
mm,
to ensure that the people that you're calling into your life, the jobs, the opportunities, the what have you, like that feels like you, and that feels
mm,
congruent with where you're going and who you're becoming.
mm-hmm, totally. I love that because I think it's so actionable and it's also in itself a way of getting to know ourselves or who we truly are outside of what we're being told we should be or should follow. So I think it's a very actionable and simple exercise to be like, okay, if nothing else, what drives me in my day to day, and how can I put myself into alignment with that. And I think the beauty in that is that once you're clear on what those things are, anytime that you're acting out of alignment with them, you'll know, because you'll know what it's like to be in alignment with them, you know?
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
absolutely.
I
Mm.
love that. Well, we are almost out of time here, Kelly, but the regular practice that we also have on the Commitment to Growth podcast is that at the end of each conversation, I ask a rapid fire round of 3 questions to each guest. The first 2 are the same for everyone, and the last one is unique to the guest. So, are you ready for your rapid fire round?
I'm ready. Let's do it.
Okay. So, your first question is, what is your favorite quote?
Ooh, my favorite quote. I had a great spiritual mentor a couple of years ago, and she always said, if the vision is in you, it is for you. And
Oh,
I've written that down. I've had it on a sticky note. I keep it up next to my office desk here. And I love that it's so simple, but what I love about it is like, it's a kind of a spin on like, if you can dream it, you can have it, or whatever the quote is there. But it allows you to kind of dream big. It allows you to build the relationship with your intuition, which we talked so much about that today, of, hey, that idea was planted in you for a reason. Like you get to go explore that. So if the vision's in you, that means it's for you. Like
Yeah.
how do you get to go pursue that now?
Totally. Oh, that's the beautiful part of the existence, right? Oh, that's so beautiful. I love that. Thank you for sharing, and props to your spiritual mentor. That was awesome. The second question is, what is a song that is currently stuck in your head?
I laugh so hard because my musical tastes are so all over the board.
Oh,
And
that's okay.
so your listeners are gonna laugh, but Lil Wayne, A Millie is stuck in my
Oh,
head.
no kidding. I
Yeah.
don't think I've heard that one yet, so maybe that's what I'll go listen to after this.
Oh my goodness.
Hey, we love a well-rounded
It's
queen,
yeah.
that's fine.
It's been in my head ever since I was at the gym last night, and
Oh,
it
nice.
brings back fond memories.
Yes, exactly. That motivation. We love that. Okay, everybody go listen to that after this episode then if you want to get yourself pumped up.
I'm really dating myself here.
Yeah, exactly. We love it. We love it. And your final question is, what does intuition feel like to you?
My intuition speaks to me in signs and symbols. So if I find myself having a thought that I can't get away from, it's ruminating, it's going over and over in my head, and I can't seem to, make it complete or find a solution to it. Oftentimes, as I'm having that thought, numbers will pop up for me. I often see like 111 or 1111 or 222. If it's, something that's more symbolic, like, I don't know, an animal or something like that, that will come through for me. So oftentimes, like, rather than just discounting the signs and symbols that come my way, like, I'll kind of keep track of it a little bit and just be like, interesting, like I kept seeing that number this week, or gosh, that hummingbird kept visiting me like day after day as I was caught up in this project that I was spinning my wheels on. So to me, that's how my intuition speaks to me, is through like the signs and symbols of the universe.
I love that. I completely relate. I think what I've heard you should do is you should pick like uncommon things to say, hey, if it's coming for me, or if you think this is the right decision, to the universe, show me this thing, And I think there was a point in my life in which that was ladybugs for me, and I would see ladybugs like all the time, like even out of season. So, and that was kind of how I knew that it was on its way. So I love that, and I hope people take away from that as well. Kelly, thank you so much for your time, for your insight, for your wisdom. I love what you're doing for the world, and I know that people listening took so much away, and I hope that you keep doing what you're doing, because you're a guiding light for a lot of us who are going through our spiritual journeys and our spiritual awakenings. So thank you.
Thank you so much for having me. This was just such a fun like, I want to say light conversation, even though we went deep, but I love nerding out, talking about all things spirituality and intuition. So thank you so much for having me, Mariana.
Of course, you as well. And I will see you very soon. Thank you all so much again for tuning into this episode of the Commitment to Growth podcast. I hope you enjoyed that conversation with Kelly as much as I did, and I hope you took as much away as I did. I had like a whole page of notes that I just wrote out after that episode because I was just so mesmerized by everything she had to say. So I hope that you feel as transformed as I did, and I hope that you will take all of that knowledge into your transformation, whether that is happening to you right now or whether that is something that you foresee. Or, you know what, the cool thing about transformations is that you don't see them coming, so it's really good for you to have this awareness and this knowledge in your back pocket, so when it does happen, you're well equipped to navigate it. So with all that being said, for future updates on upcoming episodes, updates on the podcast, events, giveaways, all that good stuff, follow the podcast on Instagram and Facebook. It's at Commitment to Growth Podcast. Follow me on TikTok as well. I am posting lots and lots of fun stuff over there and still figuring out transitions, but we're getting a lot better, I promise. It's at Commitment to Growth. And remember to follow the platform of the podcast and my personal training business on Instagram as well. It's at Commitment to Growth. That has got all of your self-improvement knowledge that we talk about here, chunked in with fitness information as well. So we are working towards building holistic health, building holistic lifestyles that support our physical and mental and emotional resilience. So more on that coming in the next coming weeks, and I'm so excited to share that all with you now. And if you've got either suggestions for future episodes or you want to be a guest on the podcast, email me. It's committedtogrowthpod@gmail.com. You can find all of that in the show notes as well, because I know I just talked a lot at you. And with all that being said, again, your presence is so welcomed and appreciated here, and I cannot wait until the next conversation. So without further ado, thank you again for being here, and I will see you next time.